Hi everyone, in this video we're going to cover the logical mistakes. We're going to use this for critical reasoning and for the analyze and argument essay. This works both for the GRE and for the GMAT critical reasoning sections. Okay, remember these are not the only logical mistakes that exist. We are not making a list of all the possible logical mistakes that exist. We're just talking about the most common. Okay, you can look other mistakes up, or if you have a question about any other logical mistake, you can leave that in the comments. Okay, so this is the list. We're going to see 17 logical mistakes because these are the most common and the most common that are used in the GMAT and GRE critical reasoning and essay sections. There are other minor mistakes that we have covered in the rules of logic videos. You can also check that here in the list. Okay, so the first logical mistake is the uncertain use of a term or concept. Remember, we're going to see this mostly in the critical reasoning and the analyze and argument essay. So how does this work? Basically, it works when we're using the same term and the term has two different meanings and those meanings change within the same text. So maybe at the beginning of the sentence, the term is taking one meaning, and then during the rest of the sentence or the same paragraph, the meaning of the word is going to change. Examples, for example, here, if I say, the value of an employee is dependent upon how much value it can provide to the company, I can see that it's exactly the same term, the word value, but definitely the word value here means something different from what the word value means in the second case, right? In the first case, I'm talking about kind of the moral value or how much we appreciate that employee. And the second case, we're pretty much just talking about money. In the second one, we say the movie received a bad rating. This is actually the second case in which the term is just not defined. It's not just that the term may have two different meanings, it's that we don't know exactly what it means. This is also a very typical mistake that occurs mostly in the essays. Like, what do you mean by bad? Like 1% approval. What do I mean by bad? Bad doesn't really mean anything specific. And this is important. There are a lot of adjectives that do not really mean anything specific. Even if I say there's a lot of something, like, or it has increased a lot, what does a lot mean? More than 50%, more than 40%? You have to tell me exactly what it means. Another important example, 99% of accidents occur at home. So what do you mean by accidents? So when somebody tells you that 99% of accidents occur at home, okay, maybe, but what type of accidents? Like fatal accidents? Maybe you just trip a lot on your staircase. Maybe you just, you have little cuts here and there, or, I mean, you definitely don't have car accidents, right? So what exactly do you mean by accident? So remember, every time you see a word that doesn't have an exact definition, you have to ask for the definition of that word. Or if you have a word that may have more than one definition, you should also ask for clarification on that word. Okay. The second mistake is the source argument mistake, also called ad hominem. This is a fallacy. This is a logical fallacy. You may have heard of this outside this context. And how does it work? It works like this. Instead of in argumentation, when there are two or more positions that are being taken, instead of attacking the argument, okay, the side maybe the author of the text or whoever is taking a position is going to either attack the source, the motives, or the moral over the characteristics of the argument instead of attacking the argument, which means you're not going to try to rebate the argument. You're just going to try to say that the argument is wrong for other reasons. For example, I'm going to do example number 1 here. The new COVID-19 vaccine will not work because it was developed by the same company that couldn't develop a vaccine for the H1N1. So basically, we don't know whether the new COVID vaccine will work. But the argument here is that the reason why it won't work has nothing to do with the vaccine, but something to do with the fact that it's developed by the same company that developed another vaccine that also didn't work, which, if you think about it, makes no sense or has no relation. The second example, clearly, Anna is not suitable to be a doctor given that she has many health issues. This is a very common ad hominem attack. So you say that someone doesn't have a X or Y opinion because that same person makes X or Y mistake, right? So it has nothing to do, her health has nothing to do with the fact that she can be a good doctor. And the last example which you can definitely see outside in the real world. Many gynecologists will never be as good as female gynecologists since they lack first-hand experience. So this is a very common, again, social argument attack. So how do you know that they need the first lack experience? Remember, this can also work as an assumption question. Basically, what we are assuming here, because there is an assumption going on, is that you need the first lack, the first hand experience. And in the second in the second case, the assumption will be that you need not to have health issues in order to be a good doctor. And in the first case, the assumption will be that you need to have developed, or that all of your vaccines should have worked for your company to develop a good vaccine. Remember, every single logical mistake argument or mistaken argument has to have either an assumption or a specific part in which it fails. Okay, we have seen this in the rules of logic. Okay, let's cover the third one, the circular reasoning, also called petite principii or begging the questions. I'm putting the alternative names. Basically, I'm putting the Latin names in case some of you remember this from your philosophy or logic classes from high school or university. And I'm also putting the begging the question is kind of a very popular name for this, so circular reasoning. So basically here what we're doing is we're trying to prove something, okay, and the arguments or the premises that we're using are pretty much the same as the thing that we're trying to prove. Okay, so we're pretty much assuming something, okay, which is we're going to assume that something is true, but the same thing is actually what we're trying to prove. You're going to see that this happens all the time. For example, the first example, it is undeniable that God exists because it says so in the Bible, and the Bible is the word of God. So basically, you're saying that I'm proving the existence of God because of the Bible, and then I'm saying that the Bible is true because of God, and then you see I have gone back to the first thing I was trying to prove in the first place. So there's no real argument here. Okay, and the second one, the plan to increase the sales is going to work because if it's applied correctly, it will increase the sales. Again, if you see, I'm not really providing any good reasons here, okay? I'm just pretty much going in circles with the same reason. Okay, the fourth, errors of conditional reasoning, like P therefore Q. We have seen this in rules of logic. So when you have a cause we have a cause and effect. Okay. So the first error is sufficient versus necessary condition. And the second mistake is affirmative consequent. We have seen this in the rules of logic. And the third mistake is denying the antecedent. We have also seen this in rules of logic. So the first case, sufficient versus necessary condition, pretty much are exemplified in the alternative causes. So if P causes Q, okay, it doesn't mean that P is the only cause for Q. So P is sufficient, which means if P occurs, that's sufficient in order to cause Q, but that doesn't mean that P is the only necessary cause to cause Q, right? Again, so if it rains, the floor gets wet, but maybe the floor also gets wet if somebody just throws water on the floor or somebody pees on the floor, right? So P is not so the rain is not a necessary condition. It's sufficient, but it's not necessary. The second case, affirmative consequent, remember, if P causes Q, like if it rained, the floor gets wet, it does not mean that if the floor is wet, then it had rained. Okay, remember, since there are alternative causes, we cannot know just because of the effect that the cause occurred. And the last one, denying the antecedent. If it rains, the floor gets wet. I don't know that because it didn't rain, then the floor is not wet. Because again, there are alternative causes. Remember, all of this can be solved with alternatives. So you just have to always leave your mind open for alternative causes. So, for example, we're going to do example number 1 here. If you pass the test, it means you study. You study, so you will definitely pass the test. And you can see the mistake here, right? So if you pass the test, it means you study, right? But this goes like this. If you pass the test, that means you study. But then I'm saying if you did study, so you will definitely pass the test. I'm kind of reversing the causality, but no, maybe if you pass the test, it means you study. But maybe if you study, you're not necessarily going to pass the test. Right? Maybe you study and still not pass the test. Okay, and the second example, if it rains, the patio gets wet. If it didn't rain, so the patio cannot be wet. Again, as I told you, there are alternative reasons. Maybe someone threw water on the patio. Maybe a lot of dogs peed on the patio. We don't know. Okay, the fifth mistake, mistaking cause and effect. This is also called post hoc ergo propter hoc. And this is correlation is not causation. You may remember this from this name, like this is a very, very common popular name. which means just because two things happen at the same time or one after the other, it does not mean that one causes the other. So just because two events happen at the same time or after the other, one does not cause the other. And this is very important and very common in real life. And this is actually the cause of a lot of superstition, right? So if you see your horoscope and then something like similar happens in your life, you may attribute that to your horoscope, right? Or if I don't really know too much about that, but maybe if the moon is in some specific part, you may think that that's going to be a bad day for you, and then you have a bad day, and then you think it's because the moon was in that specific part. Okay, so examples here. The first example: when we lower the price of our wash in June, car wash in June, our sales increased by 20%. Our new business strategy was a success. Again, we don't know. I mean, the lowering the price and increase by 20% happened. Okay, but we don't know whether the increase is due to lowering the price. Okay, and this is a very important thing in business because we don't know all the other conditions. Okay, so we have to look for all the other conditions in order to know whether this is actually the cause or not. Example number 2, after John got vaccinated, he had a stomach infection. Again, this for anti-vaccine people, this may lead to the conclusion that then the vaccine caused the stomach infection. But again, we don't know. We don't know what he ate. We don't know what other conditions there were. We have no idea. If we don't have any other information, we cannot safely assume that the vaccine caused the stomach infection. Okay, we're going to go to the 6th. Strawman. This is also very common. Which is distorting the argument. Okay, so this happens when when you want to refute an argument, and by doing so, you actually mistake, like on purpose. Okay, you mistake the argument itself. So you portray a modified or a flawed version of the argument. This happens a lot in politics. You can see this, and ignores facts, context, or specific cases made. So basically, you're just making a mockery out of the argument. Example number 1: the government is spending a lot of money on vaccines. Okay, so the government is definitely trying to undermine education. So just by spending a lot of money on vaccines, we're kind of safely assuming that the government then doesn't care about education, which makes absolutely no sense. Okay, so example number 2: Congress still hasn't passed a bill on immigration reform. I just don't understand why they want all of our jobs to be taken away. Okay, so then again, like, you're changing the fact of not passing a bill of immigration, and you're equating it to jobs being taken away. This is something that happens all the time. My advice for you is practice it in your day-to-day life. And actually, when you watch the news or something, you're going to find a lot of strawman. Okay, general lack of evidence, non sequitur. Actually, if you think about it, every single fallacy is a non sequitur, which means non sequitur means that the conclusion does not logically follow from the premises, and every single mistake means that the conclusion does not follow from the premises. But this is the more obvious one. That's why it's separated. So pretty much just the premises don't support the conclusion, and pretty much they are almost completely unrelated. They're not totally unrelated. They may be about the same topic, but you're going to see how it makes no sense. So the first example, I know I'm dealing with the vaccine topic. It's just I made this during the COVID thing. So yeah. The new vaccine will definitely fail because the virus is very strong. So you're saying that the conclusion that the vaccine will fail is due to the virus being very strong, which, if you think about it, makes absolutely no sense. The strength of a virus does not determine whether the vaccine may fail or not. Now, there may be extra information that is not here that may lead to the conclusion. Maybe if I say that usually vaccines don't work with very strong viruses, then maybe, yeah, that makes sense. But just this does not make sense. And the second one, school A is very expensive, so it must be very good. This is something that happens to us in real life. We just buy the most expensive thing because if it's that expensive, then it should be good, which again is not really a good reasoning. And if you think about it, we do this all the time, right? We want the most expensive things. Now, I'm not saying that there's not correlation. Like, usually in technology, I think there's some correlation, but mostly there's no real correlation. So you have to actually have good reasons. Again, my advice for you is look for this in your real life, look for this in your own reasonings. That's going to be a very good practice. Number 8, internal contradiction. I know this sounds weird. Of course, internal contradiction is a mistake. Of course, a thing cannot be and not be at the same time, but we're going to see how you can fall for this. Again, you can notice this in your day-to-day life. So basically, there's a contradiction inside the argument. That's it. There's a contradiction inside the argument. You're saying P and not P. You're saying it rain and it doesn't rain at the same time, and that's definitely the mistake. So how could we fall for this? We're going to do example number one. This exam is impossible to understand, so we will study hard to understand it. So if you start with the premise that is impossible to understand, of course, no matter how hard you try, you won't be able to understand because you just told me that it's impossible, right? So be very careful with your choice of words. Well, in this case, when you analyze, be very careful with the choice of word that they have taken. A more likely example, company A sells the cheapest car appliances in the whole country. Company B has the cheapest car appliances in the city. Again, if you're saying that this is the cheapest in the whole country, this includes the city. So you cannot say that B is the cheapest in the city, okay? Usually these types of mistakes are due to lack of either nuance, using extreme words like impossible or cheapest, not one of the cheapest by the cheapest, then that's an extreme. And usually when you are not nuanced, when you take extremes, you're going to contradict yourself. So again, take a note of this for real life. Again, my advice for you, just try to practice this in real life. When you read the news, when you talk to people, you're going to see that these are everywhere. Okay, the ninth mistake, we're going to call them appeal fallacies. These are the ad verecundiam, the ad passiones, and the ad populum. Basically, when instead of giving an argument, you say something like, oh, because I'm your father and I say so. Okay, so we're going to do the first one. Okay, actually, this is not here, so I'm going to have to put it up. So it's either referring to an authority, referring to emotions, okay, or referring to the majority of people, like democracy. Okay, so appeal fallacies, we have the premises don't provide reasons. It just appeals to authority, emotions, or popularity. So, for example, this movie is better than any other movie because it won an Oscar. So you're saying that the Oscar, or just the fact that the Oscar award gives the characteristic of being better than any other. Again, I'm not saying that the Oscar is worthless, and I'm definitely not saying that I'm not saying the opposite, right? I'm not saying that it's a bad movie. All I'm saying is that you cannot just make a statement like this. The second case, you should vote for X. He just lost his wife. Okay, so basically you're appealing to emotions. This happens a lot, right? So why should I do this? Oh, because my cat died yesterday or something. So again, this is an appeal to emotions, which again, in real life may be a reason, but it's definitely not an argument. Okay, it's definitely not a premise to satisfy the conclusion. And the last example, politician X won the election, so she's definitely the best choice. Again, this is what happens in democracy. Okay, all we can argue is that it won the elections, like he or she won that she won the elections, but we don't know whether it's the best. All we know is that it won. Okay, so be very careful to distinguish, and words do matter. Okay, popularity is not equal to quality. Again, this is also something that happens with users of any app or any basically thing that you buy. Just because a lot of people have it doesn't make it the best. Okay, the 10th, survey error. This happened again. This happen in critical reasoning, but this type of errors happen also a lot in the argument essay. So you either have biased sample, confusing questions, or inaccurate responses, which means in the biased sample, you're not taking a good sample, either because you're asking and a specific bias set of people. This is something that happens in real life, and you're going to see how it looks like. So we're going to go with number one. In a survey made at the exit door of a movie theater, 90% of respondents say that they prefer to watch a movie than a sport match. Therefore, and here's the key, we should spend more money in advertising the movie theaters than in stadiums. Did you spot the mistake? Of course, if you poll people outside a movie theater, the majority of them are going to say that they prefer to watch a movie, right? So that doesn't mean that you should allocate more money to advertising in movies. It just means that you need to hire another person to make polls, because you shouldn't just be polling your general audience outside a specific entertainment facility, right? So you should go to stadiums, you should go to restaurants, you should go to have a randomized sample. Okay, the number two example for confusing questions is like this. 10% of the population responded yes to the question of whether they would be able to walk to the supermarket. Again, what do you mean by being able to walk to the supermarket? If I have the ability to walk to the supermarket, if I have permission to walk to the supermarket, remember, there may be confusing questions. Okay, and finally, the last example, 99% of the respondents say they never lie. which again, if I ask people if they lie, they more likely going to say no, right? And actually, it's a very good book called Everybody Lies, in which they show us how well, of course we're going to lie if they ask questions that are too personal. And this is why also some polls are anonymous, right? Because we don't really want to talk about the embarrassing things. So be very careful about inaccurate responses. Okay, the 11th mistake, exceptional case over generalization, which is also called a hasty generalization, in which from one case we pretty much generalize to say most, all, which makes no sense. Okay, if you think about it again, this is still a non sequitur. Okay, so we use individual cases to support an extreme general conclusion. Remember, in general, be careful of extreme words like all, none, most, etc. Okay, or the best, the worst, etc. So the first example, the dogs in my neighborhood are very loud. I will not get a dog because dogs are very loud. So even if all the dogs in your specific neighborhood are a little loud, which even if I say all the dogs, which is an extreme, I'm still just talking about my neighborhood. So I cannot jump from neighborhood to all dogs, to dogs in the world. Okay, like that's just too big of a jump. The second example, a computer just won a chess match with the world champion. Clearly, no human will ever be able to win a computer in a chess game. We know that this is contrary to fact. So again, just because one thing happened, we cannot generalize, okay? And especially with in these kind of things, like we have one thing from the category computer, competing against one human, like category human. So we cannot extrapolate this to all the individuals involved in the category computer and all the individuals involved in category humans. And so in general, we just try to avoid generalizations. Okay, the 12th mistake, errors of composition and division. We're going to see how this works. Again, it's very similar to the generalization. So first mistake, we misattribute a group characteristic to each member. So we take something that the group as a whole has and we attribute it to an individual. And the second one is the reverse, right? We take a characteristic that a member has and we attribute it to the whole group. You're going to see how this works. So we have the first example. Company X has increased its sales by 40%. So every product they say must have increased sales by 40%, which is not necessarily so, right? Maybe on average, the whole increase is 40%, but it doesn't mean that every single product has increased sales by 40%, okay? Again, in the economic sector, for example, you can say that people have increased their income by 20%, but that doesn't mean that every single individual has increased their income by 20%. The second example, supermarket X sells sodas cheaper than supermarket Y, so ice cream must also be cheaper. Again, it doesn't make sense. Just because one specific item is cheaper doesn't mean that all the items are going to be cheaper. The opposite applies, right? Just because one specific item is going to be more expensive doesn't mean that all the items are going to be more expensive. 13, false analogy. We also do this all the time. So here's when we compare two things. Remember, analogies themselves are okay. You can pretty much draw an analogy of a lot of things. But the problem is when you draw incorrect conclusion, when you draw conclusions from the specific parts that do not compare. So not the elements involved match. So this is important because when you draw an analogy, you want to draw conclusions from the parts that match, not from the parts that don't match. For example, here, planets in a solar system orbit a star. Electrons in an atom orbit a nucleus, and electrons jump instantly from orbit to orbit. Therefore, planets in a solar system jump instantly from orbit to orbit, which makes no sense. So to this point, planets in a solar system orbit a star, and here orbit a nucleus. That analogy is fine. Okay, they correspond. But when we start talking about electrons jumping, like that doesn't match to any part in the planets in the solar system, right? So the analogy has to stop here. So it cannot go any farther, which means, again, the analogy up to that point is not wrong. Okay, just that whatever else I add is going to be the incorrect thing. So the second one, the president of country X is female and led to a disastrous economy, so we shouldn't elect a female president. Again, just because a president is female doesn't mean, well, again, this is kind of a case of generalization, right? But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't elect a female president because, yes, all they have in common is the female president, but we don't know anything else. We don't know their politics. We don't know their economic stance. We have no other information. So again, the analogy stops there. Okay, 14th, false dilemma. This is again something that happens like when they make you think you only have two options and you kind of fall for it and you don't see that you have more options. So why not both or neither? Maybe you have an extra option or maybe you have the options to have them both, right? So the false dilemma goes like this. They present two options as the only ones, and there actually are other options, or both or none. An example will be here. Sales are decreasing too much. We need to increase them, or soon we will be bankrupt. Okay, maybe we don't need to increase them. Okay, maybe we just need them to not decrease. Okay, or maybe we need to do something else. Maybe we need to, I don't know, fire some people. Maybe we need to stop spending so much money somewhere else. Okay, maybe we need to advertise more. We don't know. Okay, but maybe this is not the only alternative that we have. Okay, number B. So second example, Plan A increases sales by 5%, while Plan B increases sales by 4%. Clearly, the best option is to apply Plan A and not Plan B. Okay, that may be the case, but maybe why cannot we apply both? Maybe there's a chance that we can apply both plans, or maybe there's a Plan C. How do we know that there's no Plan C? Right. So remember, don't just fall for it. Just because they present two options, that doesn't mean that those are the two options. And remember, always leave this an opportunity for having both or having none. Okay, the 15th mistake, errors in the use of evidence. So this looks like this. So we have absence, the first mistake in which absence of evidence proves false. I'm going to go one by one because this may be a little bit confusing. So absence of evidence proves something false, which is not true. So in the first case, I say, I have never seen radio waves, so radio waves don't exist. So just because I haven't seen them, just because I don't have evidence, I have to conclude that they don't exist, which is false. Okay, like absence of evidence does not prove that something is false. The second example, absence of evidence against something proves that the thing is true, like in a crime court, which again, in a crime court is kind of true, but for moral reasons. So number 2, Roger has been accused of using company money for personal benefit. There is no evidence, so he's innocent. Again, so according to the law, he may be innocent, but he may have just used company money for personal benefit and just cover all his tracks. We don't know, right? So again, absence of evidence, that's not proved it true. And this is why words matter. So we can say, so he was declared innocent. So he was declared innocent, which it's perfect, but we don't know whether he is innocent. Okay, the third type, any evidence against proof is false. The third example here, yesterday stock price decreased by 1%, so the new business strategy is clearly not working. Again, so just one piece of evidence, especially if this is a new strategy that you just put into practice, and you have like one little decrease of 1%, we don't know, again, because we don't know the extra information. We don't know what else happened in the market that day, okay? So just one little piece of evidence does not prove something false. And this is also why in the critical reasoning section, they call it strengthening and weakening questions. They don't call it like they completely make the argument false or they completely make the conclusion true question, right? They're just strengthening, like make it a little bit more likely, or weakening, which is make it a little bit more unlikely. So the last type, any evidence in favor proves it's true, which is kind of the opposite of the third one. So this is when you see the last example here. The mayor has been accused of lying to the press. His daughters say that he constantly lies, so he has definitely lied to the press. Again, just because we have one tiny piece of information does not mean that the big argument is true. Okay, again, try to find this in your day-to-day life. Okay, time shift errors, we're going to see this. So basically, we don't take the context into account. So we're going to assume that conditions remain constant over time. And this is very important. Remember, we always want to account for change. So the first example, we should reuse the ad campaign for 2001 because it managed to increase sales by almost 60%. Okay, but then again, we don't know where the conditions from 2001 still exist. Okay, and this is why you need to revise your campaigns every single year because conditions always change. And a second example, last weekend we went to the beach and it rained, so let's not go this weekend because I don't want to get caught in the rain. This is a more obvious mistake, right? Of course, just because it rained last weekend, it doesn't mean that it's going to rain this time, right? So, but if you think about it, it's exactly the same mistake that you make when you create other conditions. Like last time I went to this restaurant, like the lighting was bad, so this time probably is going to be bad. So we don't know. And the last mistake, numbers and percentage errors. These are, again, something that happens a lot. We basically have two types of mistake. We either mistake a number for a percentage or mistake a percentage for a number. So, for example, in number one, I'm going to say more than 3 million people in country X are underage. So clearly country X has a majority of underage population. Why? Because the word 3 million, or the number 3 million sounds like a lot of people, but we don't know what is the total population of country X. Maybe it's 100 million, in which 3 million will not be a majority. Maybe it's 4 million, in which 3 million will be a majority. So just by the number itself, we don't have the total. We don't know whether this represents a majority or not. I'm going to see example number 2. 90% of the population in CTA are employed, while only 70% of the population in CTB are employed. So there are more people unemployed in CTB. We don't know whether this is true because we don't know the total amount of people in CTA and we don't know the total amount of people in CTB. Maybe there are only 100 people in CTA when there are like 5,000 people in CTB, in which there will be more people employed in CTB even when the percentage is lower. This is something that happens all the time. Again, try to look it up, try to find the mistakes when you look them on the news, when you speak to people. Okay. So remember, conclusions must be supported logically. They must follow a logical path. Remember to analyze only the argument, not how you feel about the argument. Even the argument agrees with you, even when you pretty much make the same argument, still try not to go with it. Don't go with hunches, okay? Try to analyze the logic of it. And remember, correct answers don't have logical mistakes. So every single incorrect alternative will have a logical mistake. Also, remember to practice this in your day-to-day life. This is a skill, and the more you practice, again, practice it with your own thoughts, practice it with your family, with your friends, when you watch the news, when you watch movies, when you listen to songs, just try to spot the mistakes, because there are mistakes everywhere and you can spot them every day. Okay, so that's it. And we're going to continue with the specific question types. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and leave any questions you may have in the comments. Thank you. Bye.